Today's edition of the podcast is brought to you by CoachMePlus. CoachMePlus is the leader in athlete management software and a product that I've been lucky enough to be using for a little over a year now. Only rivaled by the impeccable customer service that Kevin and his staff provides, CoachMePlus's ability to constantly be amoeba-like in their ability to mold and matriculate what you're trying to get across and bring together is absolutely fantastic. Their constant pursuit of better ways and better methods and innovations and progress to their own product is absolutely fantastic. Go over to CoachMePlus.com. Check out what they got, guys. It's something that I guarantee you won't be disappointed with. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, we have an absolutely killer talk with CoachMePlus, a sports performance specialist and founding coach, and 2017 presenter, Doug McKenney. Guys, Doug is going to talk to us today about the evolution of the strength and conditioning profession, looking at his career that lasted 30 years in the National Hockey League. We start out talking about, the cultural changes that have occurred, from his early time in the NHL in the 80s up until about 2015 when he was with the Sabres. We then touch upon how he looked at educating and teaching not just the athletes, but the coaches and the management about the importance of recovery, nutrition, and sleep, and how he's seen that evolve over his 30-year career. We then look at how he developed a monitoring system from his time from Pittsburgh all the way to his time in Western New York, and how all the progress he's seen in the profession. Everything still comes down to driving conversation with it, whether it be staff or coaches or the players. And we close out, guys, talking about what he's going to discuss here at the 2017 seminar. This is an absolutely killer talk, guys. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Let's get right to it. Doug, thanks for being on with us today, bud.
My pleasure. Good to be with you, Jay.
Yeah, so let's just give people a quick little rundown of your story and where you've been and how you've gotten to Coach Me Plus, and then we'll get into the meat of it.
Sounds good.
So you started out with a little hockey club somewhere in the middle of Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I started with the Penguins. And the funny part about that was I was straight out of grad school. And, of course, I thought I knew everything there was to know about working with athletes in general. But the hockey culture is so different, and particularly during that time frame. A lot of these guys were coming from junior hockey. There weren't a lot of college players at that time. There weren't a lot of Europeans. The European influx was just at its beginning stages. We're talking about, early 80s, mid 80s, 84, 85. And, interestingly enough, the major group of athletes, or the highest percentage of athletes, obviously hockey players, were Canadian players. And the American-born players were actually starting to make their way in and increase in number. But for me, it was, of course, I was originally from New Hampshire, and went down to Mississippi State to get my master's degree. So if you can imagine the northerner down to the south, that was culture shock in itself. Right down into the middle of the Bible Belt. I had a dry county, that didn't help much. And so, I graduated from there, and fortunately enough, got a job with the Penguins. And like I said, the culture is so different, and their exposure to training and the day-to-day work that you would do as a professional athlete was so different. They weren't exposed to, even the simplest stuff like going through flexibility, your dynamic active warm-ups, or your static stretching. A lot of those guys would get to the rink half hour before, go and get a heat pad and put it on their backs. And then, within 15, 20 minutes, they're putting their gear on and out on the ice. And that was common practice in 84, 85. And so now we're integrating, preparation. We're going to do pre-work before we go on the ice, and how we're going to reduce the chance for injury with regard to our prehab type work, like internal, external rotation stuff in the weight room. And all this stuff was brand new to them. I thought my middle name was a swear word for sure, because I heard that more often than anything else. When I said, okay, let's go, boys, we're ready for a stretch. They want nothing to do with it. So it took me almost 2 years, literally, to change the idea, the concept that we have, some work to do before practice and after practice, and the practice itself, we're going to monitor that as well. We're going to do various different things with regard to that. So the culture was the hardest part, and the fact that, you have to, and what I learned is that you really have to be good at coaching the coach, but you have to be really good at, just like anything else, and it still continues today, is educating the player. And so, the first couple of years were rough, but then, we really turned the corner, and guys really saw the results of what we were doing. We reduced the chance for injury a lot in a lot of different ways, especially those soft tissue injuries. The guys grew into what we were doing. So Pittsburgh, was a place where I actually believe I learned more about the game and more about the culture before I had moved on to Hartford. In Hartford, a whole different ball of wax, because that city is in between. It's got this little circle. You got Boston, then you got the Islanders, and then you got the Rangers, and you got the New Jersey Devils. And when you listen to sports talk in Hartford, you were talking about, the Rangers, the Bruins, the Celtics. You hardly ever heard the Whalers. It was funny, but we had a good team. And again, at that stage of the game, these guys were being exposed a little bit more to training, and we're starting to get a little bit more of the European culture coming over and the American culture mixing in with it, and made it a little bit easier, because our exposure to this training at the college level was been maximized for many, many, many years. And so those college guys were actually bringing that to the Canadian groups, and in addition, the Europeans, they were doing tons and tons of stuff that we weren't even touching, at that time. So, finally made my way. That was 6 years in Hartford. Made my way to Buffalo, and at that point in time, we were still not in this technology phase we're in yet. So, I just carried a lot of the stuff that I was doing, but my experience and my knowledge with how to work with the players and coaches, general managers, scouts, what made it really effective. And my focus, from day one out of grad school, honestly, was if I could do a really good job with nutrition, sleep, and recovery, if I could teach those things, and I could, put some things in place where the emphasis was on getting really good at doing those things well, then we could have success over, basically over 100 games per year. Mm-hmm. So I brought that to the table, and and started to build on that and expand on it, the best that I could.
Well, let's follow up with that, because I think that that's something that even in the college level, people still struggle with quite a bit, and that kind of triad of things that occur outside of the weight room or outside of practice. There's always the old cliche, well, we don't control the other 23 hours of the day, and they have to do this stuff, that people bring up all the time. So what are some things that you saw from, your time from Pittsburgh moving up to Connecticut and then back over to Western New York that either progressed or changed or improved as you got going, and some ways you were able to communicate? Because that's a real different group of guys. Like 84, 85, so Mario was still playing, right?
Yeah, he was just starting up at that point.
Yeah, so you had one of the best players ever to don ice skates there. And then Hartford was in the mix for, what was it back then? Were they the Prince of Wales Conference back then? Or
Adams Division.
Adams Division, yeah, that's right. And then, your time in Buffalo, if it wasn't for Brett Hall cheating, we would have won a Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
So, it's...
No goal, I'll never forget it.
Neither will anybody who's west of Syracuse. Yeah. So, let's run through that.
Tough to swallow. Still to this day, 30 years, and really, all I wanted to do was put a ring on the finger and just ride out of town. And that's still tough to swallow that one. However, it's a great question because literally it is amazing the difference. And I'll give you a couple examples. When I first started in Pittsburgh in 84, 85, the traditional methodology for the players was, like I said, they get there, go to practice. After practice, the guys went out to lunch. And lunch didn't entail, pasta and chicken and, vegetables. And lunch was 8, 10, 12 beers. And then, they would get home for dinner, but basically crash, and that was it. There wasn't a lot of emphasis, and that was, and I'm just being honest about it. That was the culture, the guys went out for, and guys would have to make excuses if they had something to do, or they didn't want to go, they'd have to make up some excuse because it was the bulk of the team. Most everybody would just go to lunch, and it would end up being, lunch, but, they'd have lunch, but then it turned into 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 beers. Not so good for, hydration, not so good for, obviously recovery and everything else that goes along with it. So that, obviously was something that we had to address and we had to get, corrected. And I'm not so sure that we were so successful initially with it, but over a period of time, by talking about nutrition, analyzing diets, we actually used a product called Dine Healthy. Now today, most of these computerized programs are apps, and the apps are easy to use. And we encourage, especially in my last couple of years with the Sabres, encourage our guys to load those apps on their phone. And actually, we had the ability with CoachMePlus to go in and look at those guys' meals and say, hey, look, you're not getting enough carbohydrate. I mean, our major energy substrate is carbohydrate, and you need more of it. You're only taking in about 48% of your total calories from carbohydrate. We need to bump this up more. Well, we were doing the same thing back in Pittsburgh using a computer software program called Dine Healthy. And, it was interesting because they had no clue whatsoever about, macronutrients or anything else, carbohydrates, fats, proteins. What do the carbohydrates do? What are the proteins for? What are the fats for? So you really had to, like I said, you really had to do a great deal of educating. You had to say, in order for you to be able to compete and get those 28 shifts in a game, you're going to be all right for your first 4, 5, 6, but by the third period, you're going to be running dry. And, you give them examples. It's like getting in your car and driving back up to Sudbury. Well, you're not going to make it, the last period of the game. You're just not going to make it. You're going to run out of gas. So, we used all these analogies and we taught. And when we got into the point where, what are we doing with all these calories of alcohol, and where do you think that alcohol ends up being in terms of, utilization and everything else? And so we turned the corner with it. We did. There was a lot of guys that began to change their habits, and that kind of moved its way into the entire setting. At that time, we didn't have budgets for feeding guys. We didn't, in the NHL, we didn't have team breakfasts. We didn't have team lunches. We did have pregame meals, especially on the road, but we didn't have them for our home games. So a lot of this stuff was, that you see that is part and process of all professional sports today. Like in basketball, they're feeding them all the meals. In football, they're feeding most of them all the meals. Hockey, they're doing the same thing. That just wasn't happening in the 80s and 90s. And but we had to go through the process of teaching them how to eat properly, and then how they can prepare their foods at home when they're not on the road. And then we gave them menus and various different things to follow when they were on the road. And so I think we made a lot of leeway with it. Our percent body fat, at training camp my first couple years was up in the 13s, and by the time I left there 4 years later, our average was around 10. So we had lost 3% fat, and we had increased our fat-free mass. The team average weight at that time was like 178, believe it or not. The average in the NHL right now, the average is over 200. But in the league at that time was like 178, 180. And, when I left, we were around 183, 184. So we had kind of did that real good thing where the fat mass was going down and the fat-free mass was going up, and we were successful. So, literally, when you talk about nutrition, how do you measure it? You measure it through body composition. That's how you measure it. And because our fat-free mass was going up and our fat-free mass was coming down, we knew we were successful with teaching nutrition. In terms of, recovery, that was going to take a lot longer to get coaches particularly to understand the value of it. During the 80s and when I was at Pittsburgh, we were still doing two-a-days at training camp, and that was not going to change. So we really had to find, ways to, communicate with them and try to teach and educate, how we can properly recover, especially when you're playing 3 games in 4 nights or 4 games in 6 nights. And the travel at that time was also, it was not charter, it was commercial flights. And so, it was an uphill battle. And we fed off trying to get it to a point where, whatever way we could educate and move away from the traditional type stuff. And we made some leeway with it, for sure.
That's interesting, and I think that a lot of people would be surprised to hear those stories of the bus trips around the Northeast and such that occurred back when we used to really have winter too.
That's right.
But no,
bad flights.
I think that a lot of that is really interesting, especially too when you're talking the evolution of the care of the athlete by the organization. Now, a lot of this, I think, is players association based.
Absolutely.
But the provisions of those meals. So as that became wider and widerly accepted, how did you see that impact the boys up there in Buffalo?
It's a good question. You got to remember what I was talking about with Pittsburgh. The athlete itself has changed. We talk about sports performance and strength and conditioning coaches and how we've changed and how we've adapted to everything. The culture itself has, over the years, has changed so much. In the 80s, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, there's a lot of things that have gone through the process. The exposure to what LeBron James is doing, today with the athletes of today is front and center. They can pick it up and get it on any tweet. They can get it on any Facebook. They can get it off of, social media in general, but they also get it in newspaper articles all over the place. He's wearing a Whoop band. He's doing this. He's doing that. We didn't have a lot of that in the mid 80s and mid 90s up to that 10-year point. There's always been media, but the media direction wasn't so much in the area of, sports performance, so to speak. And so these players today, you got to be well versed in everything. I mean, you got to fully understand this because they're on the net, they're looking, they're reading stories, they're doing research themselves about how to reduce the chance of groin tears or whatever. And so you have to stay up on top of things, and you got to be well versed in talking about every aspect of sports science. And that's so much dramatically different from the 80s and mid 90s. And so when I got to Buffalo and we moved from the odd into the what's now called the Key Bank Center, we had no weight room in the odd. There was basically a spiral staircase up to a weight room that was, literally the size of a sandbox. And there was a old Universal machine in there and a couple Fitron bikes, and probably nobody even knows what a Fitron bike is. And that was it. And so, again, we were at a stage where even though players were training in their hometowns and away from the facilities the exposure was greater, we still had to build something, and we had to build it and create an environment in this new building that would bring the seriousness of how to prepare and be ready, and then improve performance and reduce chance for injury. And we had to bring that to the table at the KeyBank Center. And so just the exposure of the athlete with the information that's out there changed things dramatically. And if you think about it, there was, when you talk about today's technology and you're talking about, HRV, we used to get up and take our heart rate in the morning, guys just didn't do it. Even if you asked them to, let's get your heart rate in the morning and let's see what your resting heart rate is. Well, now you have HRV, or you've got quick recovery test, depending on what you're doing. You've got internal load, you got external load, you got VBT, you got all these different things that are so different than what it was in the 80s and 90s, and they're all familiar with it. So they're familiar with it by virtue of where they train in the off season, or by talking to other professional athletes, whether it's in their sport or outside their sport. And so, ideally, everything that we had accomplished early on with the Sabres just kept on rolling and growing and growing and growing into a place where, we, basically designed it so that when they walked in the room, they knew exactly what we were doing. If we were going to do a functional movement screen, if we were doing body composition, if our lift involved, some velocity-based training or using our Tendo units, if it was, a power workout or endurance workout, what were we doing? And some guys had workouts that they had to do every day, even if it was just one or two recovery lifts or prehab work. And so that's why CoachMePlus became so important to us, is that we wanted to be able to report on everything that they were doing, and we wanted to collect it and have it in one place and be able to show this dashboard and group report to our coaches and to the individual player. And it became essential for us not to be able to be rummaging through Excel spreadsheets or manila folders out of our filing cabinets. And there's nothing worse, and you know this too, Jay, there's nothing worse than a general manager tapping on your door and saying, how's so-and-so doing? If he's asking about a player, then he's concerned about him. There's some concern, or he's going to trade him. Something's going on. He's not asking just because he's, generally speaking, just curious. There's a reason. And if you can't turn your laptop around and say, here's where he's trending. He's trending upwards. He's trending the same. He's gone down. He's not improving. We needed to really make that quick, and we needed to be able to grow, with what we were doing on a day-to-day basis, and we were doing a ton of stuff, So the growth of that was incredible, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, that's fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating. And that all started back in Pittsburgh with a legal pad and a piece of and a pencil.
Yeah, and my first day at Pittsburgh, there was a sports drink called Exceed, and it was, I had done all my research out. Gatorade was popular, obviously, at that time, but it wasn't given to the National Hockey League teams yet. In other words, they weren't providing it free, with the NHL team. So I had bought this Exceed stuff, and I'd got the fluid replacement stuff in water bottles. I got it on the bench for the first practice. I was stretched out the guys. I put them out there, and I've talked to them during the stretch about hydrating during practice. There's water bottles out there, but there's also this electrolyte drink that you can take in during practice, and they're all listening, shaking their head, even though some of them were off in the dark, not listening. And I'm finished. I'm going to get ready to stretch the second group because there's the 80 guys there. We got probably 3 groups going. At any rate, all of a sudden, I hear this stick coming down the hallway, and it's just slamming the stick, and the guy's yelling out my name, Dougie, and it's the head coach, and he yells out, I don't want ice cubes. I don't want water. I don't want any of that electromagnetic crap you got out there, meaning electrolytes. And behind him is the equipment manager with a shopping cart. He's got all the stuff that I had filled up, and he's rolling it behind him with his eyes like this. And I realized, oh my gosh, what am I into here? What have I got myself into? like I said, the culture was so different. And so, we go from that point to a point where we actually, and quite honestly, a lot of people don't know this, but where we introduced Pedialyte to, the sports scenes, so to speak. We had a player, his name was Curtis Brown. He had, it was actually in 1999. You can go back and read the articles on it. It's really cool stuff. He had an infant, little baby, and got the flu. And he came to practice one day, and he just, I said, you need to get some Pedialyte, for your kid, And like a day later, he gets the flu. And he comes in, he's not feeling it, he looks terrible. And he said, should I take that Pedialyte? And I thought to myself, why wouldn't he? So I called Ross Laboratories. I said, what, is this something we could, our players could actually use as a really high level electrolyte drink that replaces fluids? Absolutely. And so from that point on, we were in the Stanley Cup Finals that year, '99. The guys were actually taping up the bottles so that Dallas wouldn't know what kind of electrolyte drink we were drinking, And that was, I don't know of any teams before that were using Pedialyte as a fluid replacement or an electrolyte replacement thing. So, we did some, you go from that point where you're talking about this coach who had no clue and didn't want water, ice cubes, water, or electromagnetic crap on the bench to a point where we actually were spearheading the use of Pedialyte within our athlete profiles and programs.
No, that's awesome, man. And then that was a heck of a team in '99 too.
Yeah, we took it right to the end, and like you said, if it wasn't for a foot in the crease, we'd be potentially wearing Stanley Cup ring.
Yeah. Who knows how the city of Buffalo would have handled that too? I mean,
they desperately needed it then, but they, especially after the Bills 4 years, it would have been phenomenal. It would have been phenomenal.
Oh yeah, it would have. Niagara Falls might have been flowing the other way. I mean, it might have just, might have been insane. So listen, let's go out with this. With such an awesome journey, and you're batting leadoff here in a couple months at the seminar, what can people expect? Like, what are we looking at when it comes to discussing your voyage with hockey and what you've seen through that? What can people expect here July 21st?
Well, part of my presentation with hockey measurements and analysis is looking at everything that we collected from an internal standpoint. In other words, heart rate, player load, and how it affected performance with regard to how we curved our practice structures, how we actually developed our practices based on our internal loads. So when you're playing, we knew exactly what every player, it was an individual player load number, and we knew what it cost them for a very hard practice, an average practice, or recovery practice, and we knew where we could go. So we actually structured, our practices based on our load, our player load, and that was something just totally different than we'd ever done before. And so that was the basis of how we went about doing that. We looked at the body composition of the player, how we wanted to feed them, how we wanted to take what it was costing them in each of these practices and make sure that we were getting that glycogen back in the muscle. So it's just taking all the information that we were using and determining how our practices would be, how well we would be prepared for games and travel. And that's the premise of the presentation. However, there'll be a lot of stories just like the one I told you, because I think essentially what it boils down to is that when you're in it for a long time, you can talk about how things were and where they're going, and how we have to kind of hold on to some of those things from back there, and also grow with things. But essentially, the bottom line is that we have to be good educators, and we have to be good at coaching the coach. So, no, that's the in essence, that's what I'll be talking about.
Oh, that's awesome. I can't wait for it, man. Having an understanding of where we've been and where we're going, I think people so often overlook that, like, and I've talked this with my assistant. Like, so many people want to take things that people have done all the work for, and they want to be like, well, I want to put my spin on it. And it's like the example I give him is like people love to change how they progress to the depth jump. Like,
Right?
do you really think you're smarter than Yuri Verkhoshansky? Like, do you think he didn't think of that? Like, dude, he did it forever. Like, this was his whole life. Just do what he did, and then when you get to that point, then you can change it.
Yeah,
Then
right.
you get creative. Like the book's written, like, don't change the story,
Yeah.
write the next chapter. And
Don't, yeah.
it's
Don't try to pave a road that's already been paved. It's, there's some things that you can use with that, and you can branch off it. You can make some different roads, but the stuff that's already sound and it's good sound science. It's evidence based. It provides you with the information that you need to have to train and elevate performance levels. But when you start to try to do things that or elevate it in such a way that brings it away from it, then you can create more problems than you're helping.
no doubt about it. Well, nah, Coach, super excited to have you here in a couple months, man. This is going
I'm
to be
excited.
absolutely awesome. And
Yeah,
this is a killer talk. It'll be up Monday, man. People are going to love it. Thank you so much for your time.
my pleasure. Good
Yes,
talking, Jay.
you too. Thanks. And a huge thanks again to Coach Me Plus, a sport performance specialist and founding coach and 2017 seminar presenter Doug McKenney for sitting down and talking with us today. Guys, I mean, he's seen it from the ground floor all the way up to where we are now. Some awesome nuggets, some great information. Coach, can't thank you enough for being so candid and open and honest with us today. Again, guys, at the end of the day, it just comes down to building relationships and having good communication skills with everyone that you're involved with. All of these monitoring things seem to come back to that, and I love when you see certain commonalities like that. So, Doug, thank you so much. Super excited to have him on campus too, guys, for the 2017 seminar coming July 21st and 22nd here at the University of Richmond. Make sure you check out the page and get your seats now. But, guys, I hope you enjoyed the talk, and if you did, please share it through the social media outlet of your choice. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be. Again, guys, just trying to spread the word and get great information out to all the coaches out there. So if you haven't subscribed on iTunes or Podomatic or YouTube yet, please go ahead and do that. And if you did enjoy it, hit the like button, hit the share button. We greatly appreciate you guys for doing all that. And we also appreciate everything you guys do for us here at Central Virginia Sport Performance. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.